Right, folks, I'm delighted to be joined by former Chief Executive of the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, Brian Wickham. Brian is in New Zealand and has joined us on the line. Brian, I thought you'd be cocooning down in West Cork enjoying the April sunshine. Explain what role you've taken up in New Zealand to me, please.
Hi, Jack, and thank you. It's nice to talk to you. I was planning to be in West Cork 23rd of May, but some things have got in the way of that. So since October of 2018, I've been back pretty much full-time focusing on New Zealand cattle breeding issues. Cut a long story short, I've got a couple of roles that I have, and they're kind of bundled into one. And there's two parts to it. One is to try and help establish an industry infrastructure which can deliver the greatest possible rates of genetic improvement for New Zealand cattle and other species. And secondly, to manage New Zealand Animal Evaluation Limited, which is a company owned by Dairy New Zealand, responsible for the establishment and maintenance of the BW. This, what was going to be initially a sort of a modest consultancy contract, has grown into something considerably bigger now.
Okay, so I mean, Brian, we're focusing. Obviously, it's the start of the breeding season effectively here in Ireland at the moment. This week, a lot of the cows across the country are starting the breeding season. A lot of farmers are starting to breed their cows. So we're having a focus on, I suppose, breeding and I suppose a little bit of a look back to look forward. I suppose in essence, I mean, if we were to cut straight to it, you left ICBF in 2012, and one of, I suppose, when you were the boss of ICBF, while you were there were some advisors and consultants, I suppose, comparing and contrasting the BW with the EBI. There's still some advisors and consultants at that. Is it fair to, I suppose, to compare and contrast between the two, or what do farmers need to consider when they're comparing between two indexes like that?
So, Jack, the EBI and the BW, I mean, they're doing pretty much the same job. EBI for Ireland and the BW for New Zealand. And, you know, the EBI has evolved considerably since we first developed it. And I think we launched it about 2001, was it, or 2002? So it's close on 20 years old. And as has the BW, and I was closely associated with the BW up until 1998 when I started at ICBF. Their goal is the same, which is identifying dairy cattle, which in future will generate the greatest profits for farmers. So I think they share a very common ambition, and they're evolving all the time. And we've just initiated a review of the BW with a particular focus on ensuring it is fit for the future. And I think the EBI has gone through those sorts of reviews periodically. And we are focusing for the BW on a couple of aspects. One of them is the way we arrive at the value we place on the milk components, fat and protein in particular. Currently, it's based on a 3-year rolling average of the most recent market returns. And your viewers will know how quickly the value of fat has increased relative to protein. And there's a real question, certainly in my mind, as to whether that does, in today's values, reflect what we would expect when these animals we're breeding today, your farmers are breeding today, will start milking and their descendants will be milking. And I think we need a better way of anticipating the future markets. And I know that was part of the EBI thinking. So Lawrence Chalou has that lovely model that looks out into the future for the EBI. So that's one aspect that we're having a look at, is one of the big motivators. The other is the emphasis we place on traits such as fertility and greenhouse gas emissions. And both of them, we have the feeling that perhaps we should be giving them more emphasis than we currently do. And there's a
I mean,
number of other considerations, but it's the key part of it. And the guy that's carrying out the review, Jack, is Peter Amer and his team at Abacus Bio, who played quite a big role in the EBI and of course, the Eurostar indexes, as you're aware.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is interesting, Brian, to kind of try, as you say, you're trying to future-proof the index to try and see ahead, see around the corner. I mean, and it's interesting to say that you, in the BW, are you saying to me that you are trying to increase the weighting on fertility, and as a result, get a better greenhouse gas result because you have less replacements needed and you have longer living cows, etc., and that kind of thing. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, there are two things there, Jack. One is fertility. I mean, the lesson I learnt in Ireland when we put the EBI together was that farmers placed more value on fertility than our economic analyses were saying they should. And in New Zealand with the BW, the emphasis we put on fertility is based on an economic analysis. And I just really want to know whether we are putting enough weight on fertility, and perhaps we need a mechanism to get a better indication of what farmers think, as distinct from what our models tell us. The other bit is greenhouse gases, which is quite separate from fertility in the sense of how we put the BW together. I mean, greenhouse gas is a growing issue for agriculture and dairying in particular, and breeding can do something about it, as we all know. If we were to include greenhouse gases based on the carbon prices we have today, it wouldn't make much difference. So I think there's a question in my mind as to, well, today's carbon prices are not the carbon prices when these animals are going to be producing in the future. So again, it's this trying to get an index that better predicts or anticipates the economic and environmental circumstances when these animals are going to be producing and their descendants are going to be producing.
Okay, I hear you. One of the, I suppose I call it the future proofs of recent times has been the evolution of genomics and the usage of genomics in establishing, I suppose, these proofs. I mean, there are still Irish farmers that are skeptical on using genomic sires, and they will prefer to use daughter-proven or non-genomic sires. In terms of New Zealand, there are a number of commercial companies that play in New Zealand. Are they all using genomic sires, I suppose, and are they making them available to farmers?
So genomics, New Zealand was one of the first countries in the world to implement genomics in their cattle breeding program, and that was the research effort at LIC. It didn't necessarily go well, but I think they've learnt a lot of lessons, as we all have, Ireland included, as to how to make good use of genomics. So in New Zealand, there's two companies that supply a high percentage of the dairy semen market, LIC and CRV Ambreed. They both have advanced genomic breeding programs, and they're both using that information to select bulls that they market in New Zealand. Having said that, there is probably a considerably higher percentage of daughter-proven bulls still being used in New Zealand than Ireland and than in many other breeding programs. The other thing we have in New Zealand, which is really the focus of my work at the moment, is the national body. So this is the ICBF equivalent, if you like, is NZAEL, the company that I'm working for. Is responsible for dairy genetic evaluations, but it does not have access to genomic data. And the commercial companies, LIC and CRV, compute their own genomic evaluations. So in February this year, we launched what I think is the first of two steps to remedy this situation. The first step was to move NZAEL onto a state-of-the-art evaluation system, and the second step, which depending on the outcome of our current industry discussions, is scheduled to enable NZAEL to start providing genetic evaluations incorporating genomic data from February next year.
Okay, so just again now, just let me digest this and let me kind of understand properly what's happening. And I get the feeling, so if I was to try and convert it into a kind of an Irish scenario, you'd have the likes of Munster AI and Progressive creating their own evaluations for their sires, and then the ICBF creating another evaluation with maybe not the latest technology. So ultimately, are farmers hearing from the companies and then hearing from the equivalent of ICBF and hearing different results? Is there confusion in terms of what farmers are hearing or what's happening there?
In short, yes. We do go to some length to try and keep them all aligned. We do use the same model, the same units, but this is a problem and one we need to find a good solution to. LIC and CRV as breeding companies have made big investments and they want to capture the benefits of that and not provide a free ride for their competitors. In Ireland with ICBF and the funding from the TAG levy and the Department of Agriculture, that was funding much of the genomics investment. So Ireland is in a way, or ICBF is in a much better place to deliver the full range of benefits of genomics to the wider industry and farmers. However, other countries have found solutions. US is a good example, Canada. And that's my focus as we speak, is to try and find a solution that will give us a national genomic evaluation, like you have in Ireland, like the US has.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. We might come back to that now towards the end, but I mean, again, maybe just to stick with the use of, how farmers use the information. I mean, one of the big issues I'd hear over here at farm level is, farmers say, "Oh no, I'm not going to use genomics, or I'm not going to use the modern day genetics because the cows are too big." So cow size is an issue. I suppose that's coming from the experience a lot of farmers have had in the past, where they had big cows, high volume cows, and fertility was poor, and they're saying that relationship between size and fertility is not what they want. Are they right to select within the database on size?
I think it's really important to keep it simple. If you want to improve the fertility of your herd using breeding, then select for fertility. Don't try and be clever and say, oh, but it's correlated to size. So if I get, small animals are more fertile? There really isn't much of a correlation with size. And Ireland, as New Zealand, we actually now have quite good measures of fertility. So select for fertility. And of course, including fertility in the EBI was what made the difference from the old RBI, which it replaced 20 years ago. That it has worked is so evident in Ireland. I often refer to the next generation herd at Moore Park, and it's just one of many demonstrations of how fertility has been improved by using the EBI. If farmers want to select for size, that's also very easy, and the indexes are there to help with that. But it'd be a really big mistake to select for size in the hope that it would lead to improved fertility. In short, it will not work, and you'll ultimately be disappointed. And the final point I'd make on this, Jack, is that many countries are now reporting a turnaround on fertility without any significant change in the size of the cows. And that's whether you look at the Jersey populations or the Frisian populations or the extreme Holstein populations. These two are really not related issues.
Okay, I take your point loud and clear that small cows are not necessarily fertile or more fertile. However, some farmers will say that okay, they actually they have good fertility and they want to maintain it, but they also want that little bit of extra maybe feed efficiency or overall efficiency in terms of a vision that they have that a smaller cow that can produce a kilo of milk solids per kilo of live weight, that's an efficient cow for a grass-based system like we have here in Ireland. So am I right in terms of what I'm hearing that you're saying, well, if that's what you want, let the database, let the analysis of the database decide that, rather than trying to correlate size with fertility?
Jack, the EBI is the best guide you've got. And if I was talking to a New Zealand audience, I'd say the BW for doing exactly what you've described. Animals that will generate the best returns under in your environment, your production system, your market for products, milk and meat. The data from farmers is actually speaking to you through the EBI. So I would say listen to it carefully, because ultimately it's the data that you as a farmer and your other farmers have provided that's providing this evidence to help you make those really important selection decisions.
Okay, I hear you. I mean, in terms of, and we just touched off it, last question now, just in terms of the database or the EBI database that's there, effectively what I'm hearing you're saying is that that's the jewel in the crown. Look after it, use it, and make it work for farmers in terms of profit.
Yeah, Jack, I'm always wary of analogies. What crown? And is the database, ICBF database, very valuable? Unquestionably, yes. But the value isn't in the database. The value is in the way it provides information that can be used to make better decisions. So it's ultimately all about more decisions. And I mean, look at the history in Ireland. It's helped eliminate BVD. It's helped breed more fertile cattle. It is helping breed better beef cattle. And as you know, the ICBF and Sheep Ireland are breeding now better sheep. It's provided data for research, which has enabled Ireland to lead the world in the use of genomic technologies for animal breeding, dairy, beef, and sheep. The data in the database has established that breeding can improve animal resistance to diseases. The TB and liver fluke are a couple of examples from Ireland. You should be very protective of it, while at the same time making sure the value in the data it contains is fully mined. And I'm going to use an analogy. It is the mother lode in a mine, worth nothing without mining and extracting. And that's really the real value, is going into that database and using the data to help you make better decisions in a whole range of aspects of animal production.
Brian, listen, it's often good to kind of just to look back and kind of remember where we are. And I think this little chat that we've had is kind of, I suppose, bringing it back in terms of the value we have here in this country, and the value of the database and the EBI in terms of directing farmers to what we have compared to some other countries that have gone down different routes. And as you say, invested a lot in certain technologies, but maybe not having it all centralized the same way as we have in the EBI database in ICBF. Brian, listen, thanks a million for your time. Thanks a million for taking our call, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again very soon.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. And it's really nice to talk. It does bring back lots of wonderful memories of my time in Ireland, and I'm sure hoping to be back there as soon as I can make it. Thank you.
You're welcome anytime. Thanks, Brian.